This is talking at people.
This could go on for hours.
So you're staying in tonight then?
Do you want to wait and hear me describe that? Do you want to listen and see if my spirit can use a phone? Have you ever heard a death rattle before?
But this is how you talk with people.
A few more, yeah. Good question. I'm not sure I learned this when I was at Apple, but I learned it based on the data.
Make the person feel heard like this.
Complex position, and you maybe stay equanimous rather than become agitated. All of these things tend to drive better conversations, and it seems as though you're leading that forefront. What do you see in that sort of path that we're walking of figuring out how to have better conversations?
I write about this a fair bit in 12 Rules for Life. There's a chapter, I think.
Or respected and listened to like this.
Where are they?
Outside of our universe.
How's that even possible?
Of course it's possible.
I understand. I'm not questioning it.
Okay,
Here's one. Define it.
Well, first of all, which tell us that picture works. But another region, if you wish, could have come from a different Big Bang.
But is that another universe, or is it a part of the universe that we can't see?
Here's how we've changed, and this is semantics, but where cause and effect works.
Some measurable distance.
Yes.
Or even like this.
I want you to give me a snake cup.
I'll give you a snake cup, young lady, yeah.
Oh, dirty man. Dirty Craig, dirty
I
Craig.
am not dirty. I said I'd give you a snake cup, and you will receive one, and you will enjoy it.
Bet I will.
You would.
Bet I would.
You would. How have you been? What have you been up to since I saw you last?
Hey guys, let me just turn the camera back over here so there's a better view. You got a plant there, you got the red stuff and the light. It's pretty sick. I'm just gonna say this now so I don't look like a weirdo, but I was drinking water, yeah, and it got on my shirt and I have no other shirts available at this current time. So anyways, a few years prior to this moment in time, I was very, very socially awkward. I was socially retarded, whatever you call it. And essentially every day at school, I would hide my insecurities and my shyness with a false confidence. So instead of showing my insecurity, I would be like, no, I don't want to talk to you. It's like a sour grapes analogy, if you get what I mean. The fox wants the grapes, he can't get the grapes, and so he says the grapes are probably sour anyways. That, and also I was literally terrified of the teacher asking me to say something in front of the class. I would hope every single time that he would not pick on me in class to say something. And if he did, I say, I don't know, not sure, so with a very, very monotone voice. In fact, I was so bad that I could not small talk at all. In fact, I tried impressing people, I tried telling people about philosophy and wisdom because I would read a book once in a while. And basically every conversation, I actually remember now that I would just try to make it a deep conversation, because I think at the time I had this belief that small talk was shallow and that it's only the popular, the roadmen, the popular kids of the school, they do that. I don't do that. I'm deep conversations. I'm smart. But I just didn't know how to do it, because my attempt to do small talk, guess what it was? It was, what is your goal in life? It was to ask some grandiose, random question out of nowhere to some random poor dude that was my victim, that probably had nothing else in his mind except TikTok or like what he wants to do later on in the day. And so literally I come out of nowhere, what's the meaning of life?
You jerk off? Do I jerk off?
But not surprisingly, I did not get an answer that I expected. I did not get a deep philosophical conversation that built a meaningful relationship. What I got was like a weird stare, weird treatment, that I was some autistic kid. You know, the autistic kid at the front of your maths class, and he's talking to the teacher, he knows everything. He starts talking about quantum physics and won't shut up about some historical fact. I probably sounded like that. But what if I told you it doesn't have to be this way? What if I told you that over the past few years, I've completely made a 180-degree turn? Obviously, there's still things I have to work on. I'm still young. I don't know all the answers, but I have read a lot of books, actually read them, not just like, flick a page and then forget about the rest. And not to mention, I've actually done the field work. I've actually cold approached some girl in the gym, some girl in my old school that I honestly thought was like the prettiest girl at the time. And I've honestly dived headfirst into multiple strange situations, multiple awkward situations. Like when I was heavily into my SMMA business or social media marketing, I was running Facebook ads for business owners. One day I literally, when I was walking to the gym, I kid you not, a hand on the Bible. If I let me get the Bible. Hand on the Bible. I promise you, I went into a newly opened pet store. The guy was still like adding stock into the store and he was literally just there painting. I went up to him and I tried my best to make a friendship, and I fucking did. It worked, and we talked over and over again, and he said, "Oh, come for the grand opening ceremony." And oh, we're actually hiring a website guy to do the website thing. And then a few days after that, I tried to pitch it to him, but obviously it didn't work because it was a real life scenario. But that's just to go and show you that I actually did the field work. And in fact, if I could go back in time, I'd probably wear like camera glasses or just have some type of camera to show you the footage behind it. But yeah, it's unfortunate I didn't. And so in this video, I'll be showing you two of the most important things that you will need in a conversation. And also, I just thought I'd mention, just by knowing these two principles, you'll also get people to want to talk to you more. You'll be like a precious commodity. And so yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video.
When people think you're dying, man, they really listen to you instead of just
waiting for their turn to speak.
Yeah.
Now, years ago, I was socially retarded, but I was on rigorous self-improvement at the time, and I picked up a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. You probably know of that book. And I remember reading a chapter from that book that had a story about these two people that were competing for the title of Prime Minister of the UK. And one guy was called Benjamin Disraeli, and the other was called William Gladstone. And they had very contrasting personalities. William Gladstone was this big, boisterous, clever, witty, intelligent person that basically knew everything. He also had more experience than Benjamin Disraeli, so he was looking like he was gonna win, right? But just a week before the election happened, these two men actually had dinner with Winston Churchill's mother. But interestingly enough, when a reporter came and asked Winston Churchill's mum, which one do you think is going to win the election, she said that William Gladstone made her feel like William Gladstone was the best person in the room, best person ever. But Benjamin Disraeli made her feel like she was the best person in the room. And then a week later, who do you think won? Benjamin Disraeli. And I'll explain why this happened. But after I read this story and chapter as a whole, I remember my head was full of epiphanies, and my head was full of this feeling that it's possible that I could win in social situations. Maybe this was the key that was holding me back from true relationships. And if you were to fast forward from that time to now, I would gladly say that that has in fact changed my life significantly. I'm so much more aware of the way people act in social situations. I understand that if someone's more like William Gladstone or if someone's more like Benjamin Disraeli, that most people are like William Gladstone. And actually another example that would perfectly describe my point here is actually a scenario where I went out with my mum to meet her friend, right, for dinner. But as we had more dinners and more dinners and more dinners, I actually realized that this guy really only talks about himself. And slowly, I began to feel the effects of boredom, the effects of not wanting to go out for dinner anymore, because it's just like listening to a random broken radio. But what is the concrete moral of the story here? What is the lesson you should get from the story, and what are the tactics? Well, it's to realize that first, most people crave food, sex, materialistic objects. These are like the base desires, right? And most of the time, they get fulfilled one way through another. Even if you're thinking like, oh, I'm not getting any sex right now, I don't have any bitches, you fulfill it one way or another, if you know what I'm talking about. And so all of these get fulfilled, but one, and this is something I have not mentioned, and it is the feeling of importance. The feeling of being respected, the feeling of being appreciated, the feeling of being valued. But the second thing is also to realize that people only care about themselves. 99% of people's days are thinking about themselves, their goals, what they want to do later on. As an analogy, right? If you ever get a group photograph, maybe you went on a school trip, maybe you went Boy Scouting, who is the first person you look for on the photograph? Aside from if your friends tell you, oh, your crush made that face, and you'd probably look at your crush. But if you literally just got the photograph, nothing else, who is the first person you look for? You, right? And the moment you realize that most people's days are spent thinking about themselves and people only care about themselves, is the moment you begin to know how to sell. You know how to persuade, because how you persuade someone else to do something that you want them to do is to get them to want to do it. So you want to know their desires, you want to make them see the benefit in doing what you want them to do. So now you've gotten all of this philosophy, but how do we actually be more like Disraeli? What specific action do we have to do to talk with people like Disraeli instead of talking at people like William Gladstone?
You're a very interesting interviewer because, well, especially for long form, because you're very, very curious, but also very, very tough. Like, it's interesting watching you because if you don't understand something, you will go after the person. And you're not doing it in a vindictive way, but you're quite a formidable interviewer. And I've been trying to figure out why you're so successful. And like, you're a lot smarter than anyone might think, which is quite interesting.
And just quickly before we begin, if you skip to this part, I don't blame you. I would have literally done the same. Skip to the tactics, get the good stuff first, right? But I'd urge you to watch the stuff before first. I'm not saying this so that you watch my video for longer. You don't have to, but for your own good, I find that listening to the philosophy first and then the tactics, I believe you'll do it for longer. I believe you'll do it with more enthusiasm. And by extension of that enthusiasm, that will keep you from trying it half-assed or quitting too early on. And when you try it half-assed, you won't get the result you want. And you'll probably come back and dislike this video. Now, the first tip is become genuinely interested in the other person. And this is very, very vague at first. Genuinely interested, what do I mean by that? First, let's talk about the genuinely. Genuinely is whenever you notice something that you yourself find interesting. And I have two very, very good examples from the gym I can tell you here. So one is one of my friends now at the gym, and he was doing this weird exercise that I've never seen before on the leg extension. So I'm assuming he was doing leg day, right? And you know the machine that you lock your legs in here and then they just literally do that. And he was holding it with a low weight. He was just holding there for like a minute. And I went up to him because I had already like complimented him before because I said he was hench, right? And asked him what he was doing because I found it genuinely interesting. And surprising thing was he was actually so willing to just stand there for like 4 minutes and explain this and how it's good to like lubricate up your knees because he's got bad knees. Now, another example from the gym, this is a very, very good example because it just built that friendship immediately. And this is the power of this tip. Essentially, I was doing bench, and in my gym, the benches are very close, right? So we only have 2 benches. And they're positioned very, very close to each other. So it'd be awkward just for me to sit there like this, right? Sit there like this and not say anything and distract myself with music, distract myself on my phone. So it would be less awkward for me to just start up a conversation. So that's what I did. But what I started it with was noticing that this dude had an AG1 bottle. And what that means is Athletic Greens. It's like a supplement company. And if you've ever listened to any modern day podcasts like Modern Wisdom or Andrew Huberman's podcast, you'll know that they get these sponsors from Athletic Greens. And so I just pointed that shit out immediately. I had a little bit of fear at first. What if it wasn't the AG1 bottle? I didn't give a shit. I just asked him, is that the AG1 bottle? Bam! Instant friendship. Oh, did you get that from the offer, the 1 year vitamin D plus K2 offer? And you get like 5 travel packs for it. And he's like, yeah. And I asked him, what podcast did you get it from? And he's like, oh, do you know Chris Williamson? Holy shit, yeah. And then that just built the friendship up immediately because we're like, holy shit, we're basically like the same. And that is the power of genuinely being interested in someone else. But even if you don't find anything mutually interesting, maybe it's one of those people that have their own music playlist and they're super fanatics about their own music, but then you don't really get their music style. Maybe they make their own music as well and they show it to you. What I would do in that scenario is actually just try to genuinely find something to be interested in. So listen to the music and try to pick out one or two things you really, really like. And in my scenario, I said his music was very classy. It's very sophisticated. It sounds like it belongs in a top-notch restaurant in the place we live around. So that's like a much better response than, yeah, it's alright. Yeah, it's pretty good. And in fact, it even drew out a surprised or shocked response from him. And he was like, really? Do you really think it's that classy? But just the last thing I want to say, if you do still want to talk about yourself, you know, tell them how great you are and shit, we all have that urge. You can still do this and do this perfectly well, in fact, more with this tip. Because what you'll find is, if you genuinely become interested in them and find a mutual interest, they'll naturally ask you back anyways. So instead of you barraging them with stories that they didn't ask for, they'll literally ask you back. Like, let's say you had a really good point with them, you ask them like the AG1 bottle and shit, and it's like this. Someone asks you how you are, you say good, you ask them back. It's like natural what's the fucking word? Reciprocity. They give you something, they ask you something, you ask them back. I'm sure you've experienced this in conversation before.
You do it so often, it becomes pretty, I mean, you're so good at talking, you're such a good orator, and you're so articulate that it comes off smooth and easy. You're just having a conversation with someone, but you're always considering the fact that people are listening to this. You're always saying, how do I get more out of him or her? How do I take this and how do I get this person to expand upon this? How do I make this something?
Most people in the world simply wait for their turns to speak. Imagine the magic you can give if you listen, and just listen. Take your situation out of the picture. Most of the great speakers I know, the big thinkers, for example, Jordan Peterson, for example, Steve Jobs, they all listen and think about their responses. And that's one of actually the secrets on how to articulate your thoughts into words and how to articulate clearly and not just speak out with the ums and ahs. This is also, I should mention, a common dating advice. You know those YouTubers that make 10-minute videos and they're like, oh, so if the girl looks at you, this is what you have to do next, or 5 ways to impress the girl. And one of the points that reoccur amongst all of these channels is you gotta speak less. Speak less and let the girl speak more. And I know it sounds simple at first, listening, right? But I actually have a lot to explain to you about how to listen, and also 2 pro tips at the end on how to listen better, I guess. So when I say listen, you probably might be thinking just sit there quietly and listen to them. That's basically like 50% of the equation, but there's a few more variables. So one is you have to ask them questions. Keep on asking them about the interest and the interest and the interest. And this helps if you're mutually interested, if you're interested in the topic. But this is where most people fuck up. And this is where I fucked up the most. If you do actually have something cool to say, you have a story that might relate to his story or a situation that is so similar to your friend's story, then just save that for later on. I know you want to say it, I know you want to tell him about it and then let him know and then maybe get some validation for it, but just save it for later on when the conversation inevitably dies down a little bit and there's like an awkward gap or like a gap where you don't have something to talk about. Then you can bring up the point and then extend the conversation. So how much you actually bench? Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, for one, I bench 95 kg. 95 kg for one. You're 17. Jesus Christ. That's pretty good. Yeah, it's decent. It's alright. How many times you jerk off per day? What the fuck? Come on. Do it with me. Do it with me. Why you... What? Because if you stay listening to him, you'll end up getting better questions in your mind and you'll actually make the conversation better and deeper rather than just chipping in with your own situation. Now, the 2 pro tips. One is wait after they finish speaking. So have a pause after they're speaking. And this is going to be a little bit awkward at first. especially if you're used to just answering the question right away with, so it's gonna be a little bit awkward. But as soon as you practice it a little bit more, it's actually such a fucking advantage to any answer, to any reply ever. One, it makes you seem more confident because you're okay with silence. Two, it actually lets you think of a better response, and not to mention how to articulate it better. And the second tip is assume that they know something you don't. Let's say we're talking about the gym and how to deadlift. Your friend says everything that you know about the deadlift. Be kind of like a gorilla, have your chest up. You know all of that. And here's the mistake most people do. After your friend says like the fifth thing that you know about, you begin to get a little bit bored, right? But what if on the sixth, he says something that changes your deadlift form and you feel it so much more? So listen with intent, like they know something you don't. But ultimately, with all of these points, if you listen to someone and you can bear to listen to them for ages, that's probably a good sign that you have a long-term relationship. You can have a successful one. So now you've gotten the tactics to talk with people instead of at them. But what if I told you that was only the cherry on top, the tip of the iceberg, and that there's actually a few rules to charisma that dictate your whole social life? It's like an invisible force. But once you know of it, then you can begin to level up, and then you can have better mental health because you know why things are the way they are. You know why one day you feel super charismatic, one day you feel like a socially awkward loser, and maybe one day your crush likes you, maybe one day your crush doesn't like you. And so if you want to know that, check out my free community in the link in the description below. It's completely free, and there's a whole short mini course that I did for you that's condensed all of the knowledge, all of the basic knowledge that you actually need to get from socially awkward loser to charismatic, all in 40 minutes. So all of those other YouTubers, I'm not hating on them, but they make these courses that are like 5 hours long. Honestly, who's gonna sit through that? So here's the 40 minutes, it's free. All right, see you there, bro. New heavyweight champion of the world.